Morning, everyone. We're just going to give it about 1 minute here before we get started, just to see if a few more folks want to trickle in. And just for folks that just joined, we'll give it like 30 more seconds here. All right, well, I think we're about good to get started. Thanks to everyone for joining us here this morning. My name is Will Flanders. I'm the research director at Wisconsin Super Law and Liberty, joined today by Cory Brewer, who's our education counsel, as well as associate counsel here at Will. It's National School Choice Week around the country, and as part of the celebration of School Choice Week here in Wisconsin, we're taking a look at some of the data that's come out in recent months for both public schools and private schools, charter schools around the state of Wisconsin. We consider all forms of education to be an educational choice. Just a little bit about Will as we get started here. Most of you folks are probably familiar, so we'll go over this pretty quickly, but we're a nonprofit law and policy center located in Milwaukee. We engage in education, litigation, and participation in public discourse on a wide variety of different issues. Along with education, some of the areas that we're focused on are limited government, free speech, and transparency. And on the policy side, a lot of the work I do is producing comprehensive and timely policy reports on some of these issues, also including economic freedom as well as healthcare. So what do we know about school choice in Wisconsin? Well, as we say at the top here, Wisconsin has some of the most diverse school choice offerings in the country. The first program we have mentioned here, the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program, is actually the oldest school voucher program in the country and now serves more than 27,000 students. The second program that we expanded to on the private school choice side was the Racine Parental Choice Program, now serving nearly 4,000 students, more than 3,000, actually approaching 4,000 students. And then the Wisconsin Parental Choice Program is the statewide program that's grown to serve more than 17,000 students across the state. We also have the Special Needs Scholarship Program. This is the program, obviously, for students with disabilities. And that program has grown to serve more than 2,000 students across Wisconsin. Another important form of school choice that often gets conflated, but is a different form of school choice, are charter schools. We have charter schools, which are public schools authorized by a variety of entities, but they have some level of freedom from the school district. We have district authorized charters, but they're still given some level of freedom. And then we have independent charters. These are authorized by a number of different authorizers, including the UW system, as well as Waukesha County Executive. So there are a number of those across the state, and more than 50,000 students are enrolled in charter schools. The last form of school choice here that we'll discuss is the open enrollment program. A lot of folks don't think of this as a school choice program, but actually it's the largest school choice program in the state. It allows students to transfer from one district to another that better meets their needs. And more than 70,000 students across Wisconsin have made use of that. So a lot of different forms of school choice to think about as we talk about School Choice Week here in Wisconsin. What we've seen across the board, and I reproduced the chart here from our Apples to Apples report for this year that's available on our website for choice schools, for private choice schools, but a similar pattern holds for charter schools and open enrollment as well. As we've seen public school enrollment decline across the state, that's the orange line here, we've seen our choice options growing pretty substantially. So here we have the combination of school choice programs around the state of Wisconsin. Again, the private school choice programs, we've gone from about 36,000 in 2017 to more than 52,000 as of 2022, even as we've seen public school enrollment decline and continue to decline since the pandemic. So it seems that families are very interested in some of these educational choices beyond just traditional public schools. And I should note here, as we go along, if folks have any questions they'd like answered, please feel free to use the Q&A feature. and we'll have time at the end of the presentation to go through any questions that come through there. Sorry, I should have noted that on the initial slide there, but feel free to post questions in the Q&A. So what do we know about the benefits of school choice that have been observed, particularly in Wisconsin? Well, there's been a number of studies over the years, and these aren't studies from the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty that we're citing here. These are studies from university-based scholars. But what we found is that students in Milwaukee that went to the parental choice program had higher graduation rates from high school, higher entrance rates and persistence rates in college, lower involvement in criminal activity. I think that's one of the more interesting studies that was conducted on the Milwaukee program over the years, and also lower likelihood of being involved in paternity lawsuits. This was the attempt of this researchers to capture sort of some moral standing or some moral issues there. But despite the evidence, there are a lot of critics out there that continue to claim the case hasn't been made for the benefits of these educational options. We continually point to this 30 years of research that in general has found positive results not only in academics but also in all these other areas that we mentioned. But it still seems that there are folks out there that don't believe that's the case. But what do we do? Why do we do the apples to apples report? Well, the goal is to fight misinformation that's out there about school choice. And I chose one example here from the Wisconsin Examiner. I'm not necessarily saying that there's not a way that you could spin this and defend what's being said in this headline. But here's a headline from October 11th that test scores for quote unquote recovering Wisconsin public schools far outpace voucher schools. There were a number of articles around the state this year with a similar sort of thrust. And indeed, if you just look at the straight test scores, if you don't look at any of the sort of nuance below the surface level, you could make that claim. What we know is that demographic factors matter quite a bit when it comes to student achievement. This is an unfortunate reality. We know that students from lower income backgrounds unfortunately tend to have lower academic achievement than students from more wealthy backgrounds. We know that Wisconsin has some of the largest racial achievement gaps in the country. We know that further test scores vary by age group, right? With high school, there's somewhat of a drop off sometimes in test scores compared to younger grades. So while that headline is defensible in terms of looking at the raw data, it's not defensible once you look below the surface and realize that the choice programs in Wisconsin, along with the charter schools to some extent, though they don't have income limits, deal with a population of students that often is a bit behind their classmates when they come into the schools. So what we try to do in our apples to apples report is account for some of those factors. We account for student economic status. And it's important to note here, this isn't just saying, well, every kid in a choice school is low income. What we do in this report is use data from the state report card that actually shows the free and reduced lunch eligibility for students in every school in the state. So this is one-to-one comparable between choice and public schools. It is important to note there are some issues with choice data where some schools don't participate in the school lunch program, but that would actually tend to undercount the number of low-income students in some of the choice schools. We account for student race, we account for the grade level of the student, and this year we're able to more effectively account for disability status. Without going into too much detail, a report that Will partnered with School Choice Wisconsin on earlier this year looked at the extent to which disability was undercounted in choice schools throughout Wisconsin. And we found that choice schools generally serve a lot more students with disabilities than are counted in the data. The reason is because to be counted as disabled in a choice school, you have to currently have an IEP from a public school. Obviously, many students participating in school choice don't have a current IEP. It's challenging sometimes in some areas to get districts to hold the evaluations. So we used a statistical model to better estimate the number of disabled kids in the choice schools around the state, moving a bit beyond the data that's directly available from DPI. So just looking broadly as we get into some of the analysis here, what do we know about the state of student proficiency in Wisconsin? Well, you can see that there's a huge dive in 2020, and folks are probably familiar with some of the reasons behind that. Obviously, we were in many areas of the state having education at home during 2020. For a lot of students, that didn't work out as well as just some of the disruptions of the COVID-19 pandemic. But as we've returned from the pandemic and gone back to the classrooms, we have seen a rebound in education, in proficiency in both ELA and math. I actually realized I cut off the label for this. The Orange line is English and language arts proficiency. The blue line is a math proficiency. So we've seen a rebound in both areas here, though we're still a bit below where we were prior to the pandemic. We're seeing proficiency rates in ELA that are about 2% lower in math, a little bit even further below where they were prior to the pandemic. But I think it's important to note there has been a rebound, but we still have a ways to go, even to get back to where we were prior to the pandemic. And when you look at the highs here, when you look at proficiency rates of about 45%, that means that about 55% of students across the state weren't reaching levels of proficiency even prior to the pandemic. So I'd argue there's still some room to go to get back to where we were, and even where we were shouldn't be considered good enough. I don't like to put a ton of the statistical models in here, but what you can look for on these charts is the stars. Stars mean that we found a significant difference. And the positive effects of school choice here in Milwaukee for private schools are found across the board in the top row. Just the way that you read that is for a student in a choice, for a choice school on average, accounting for all those sorts of demographic factors that we mentioned at the beginning of the study here, proficiency rates were about 8.9% higher in English language arts and about 7.2% higher in math. The last columns here that add disability sort of make some adjustments to those. So the sort of final numbers are 8.6% higher in ELA and about 6.9% higher in math. So a statistically significant advantage for the choice program was found. We also find an advantage for district charter schools. So these are the charter schools that are run by the district. Proficiency in those last two columns, again, was about 6.9% higher in ELA and about 6.5% higher in math. We didn't find those effects for independent charters this year. I think one cause of that might be the implementation of the disability model, but it's important to know we didn't find an effect one way or the other for district charters. Those for independent charters, those were found to be a null result. And for folks out there that like to think that as a conservative, libertarian leaning organization, we would like to cook the books, I point you to the fact that this result is there and we're showing it explicitly. So what about statewide? Again, we'll look at the last two columns here, columns 3 and column 4. We did find a proficiency advantage in reading, or ELA, for private schools across the state, as well as for district charters in ELA. We found no effect statewide in math proficiency for private schools. Again, this is consistent with every year that we've done the analysis. We've begun to find a positive effect for ELA the last couple of years, but no relationship with math. For district charters, we found a positive effect in ELA and a slightly negative effect in reading. And again, we have the independent charters actually on the other end of the spectrum slightly. And I think there's room to look at this a little further and see if this continues into the subsequent years of data, as this isn't consistent with what we found in past analyses. Looking now at what is the bang for the buck for taxpayers, what we're looking at here, and it's maybe a little complicated to read, but all these bar charts represent the proficiency gains in the choice schools per $1,000, or excuse me, in the school types per $1,000 spent. So looking at the very first column there, the ELA in Milwaukee, for every $1,000 spent, we gain about 1.8% more proficiency than we do in the traditional public schools. And you can see in all of these columns, with the exception of district charters in math at the statewide level, we do see a proficiency advantage. We're gaining more per taxpayer dollar spent in these school choice options than we are in traditional public schools. And again, all the factors that were included in the model earlier, all the demographic variables are included here as well. So it's not simply an effect of selection bias. So if we're evaluating where it's best, quote unquote, to spend resources, or at least where we should look for more efficient use of taxpayer money, there's good evidence here that our choice and charter schools are providing that. Some other findings that we have in this analysis, we looked at school value added, and this was essentially looking at the demographics of every school in the state. You can get a prediction for what you would expect proficiency levels to be. And what we did here is we combined the math and reading results and said, given what the prediction is based on the demographics of your school, what would we expect to find, and what do we actually find in terms of proficiency? And you can see there are some district schools here, starting with 12th at Kansasville Elementary in the Dover #1 school district. There's a Green Bay school on there as well. And Sevastopol has always come to the top in terms of our results, and they're up there as well. But the top 11 schools are all schools participating in the voucher program. So these are schools where, given their demographics, they're achieving far beyond what would be expected. But it's important to see, there are public schools as well that are doing a good job in that regard. Though I will note schools like Accelerated Advanced Learning Program and the Da Vinci School, these are selective admission schools. Unlike the choice program that has to take all comers, these schools do have an admission process. So, in terms of what we're seeing, what are we looking at going forward? We see that there are benefits to the school choice program, but, what have we achieved in the last couple of years? I think it's important to note here that Will has been part of a coalition for education freedom that supported, first of all, greater funding equality for choice and charter schools. So we mentioned the better bang for the buck. That was based on last year's data, where there was about a $6,000 funding gap between choice and charter schools and traditional public schools. In this year's budget, we were able to get a proposal through that equalized that to some extent, where there's about a $3,000 gap between choice and charter schools and traditional public schools. So we were able to get the funding gap closed significantly. Obviously, we don't take full credit for that. Some of our partners in that include the School Choice Wisconsin, the Badger Institute at the time, as well as AFP, and Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce also was a big part of that coalition that helped us to achieve this. We're still lower cost for taxpayers in the choice and charter sector than traditional public schools, but that gap is a lot closer than it used to be. In terms of what do we still see out there as barriers for school choice, we still have income limits in place. So for the Milwaukee and Racine programs, it's 300% of the federal poverty limit. For the statewide program, it's 220% of the federal poverty limit. We still have income caps in place, or excuse me, enrollment caps in place, so those are gradually coming off, and they'll be gone in the next couple of years here. We have a restrictive enrollment period, which means students can only enroll in certain times a year, and we have grade level entry points, so students are only able to enter the choice program in certain grades. These are things that we're looking at going forward as areas that still need additional work to improve. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Cory, who's going to go through some of our legal work in the last year and what we're looking at going forward there. Unmute. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I know a lot of the attendees are familiar with a recent challenge to school choice in Wisconsin, and that's going to be the main thing I update on today. But I also wanted to just touch on that last point about barriers to school choice, because we have another lawsuit that is currently active. We refer to this as the perfection rule lawsuit. And unfortunately, there have been some additional barriers placed by our Department of Public Instruction. This is a case pending in Waukesha County Circuit Court. Will argued on behalf of some schools and an education freedom organization, School Choice Wisconsin Action, who has many member schools, that DPI went beyond their lawful authority in effectively creating an absolute perfection rule via a guidance document, via informational bulletins, not the required rulemaking process. So this makes it incredibly difficult for families, eligible families, to be accepted into the program. And these are the private school parental choice programs for things that they really amount to a typo or a quote, wrong document based on what the department deems to be a wrong document. Just a few examples here. Not filling out the full name of a city, even though everyone in Wisconsin knows that MILW means Milwaukee. A lot of times to prove residency, individuals will use one legal name on their application, and then they'll have their same name on a residency document, like a utility bill or a lease. Something that we see coming up again and again and again is folks with maybe two last names. We have here, just as an example, maybe your application says Maria Garcia Herrera, but your utility bill only says Maria Garcia. Currently, that's not a perfect enough match. And folks would need to make corrections or be ineligible for the program. And as we just touched on, there are some programs with grade level entry points. So if a quote mistake like this is made in first, second, or third grade, folks would have to wait till ninth grade to apply again. and these are eligible families. So we've really just challenged that process of rulemaking by guidance document, kind of as a bureaucratic overreach. And actually the example that brought it to our attention was Wisconsin Rapids. The utility company was writing WISC Rapids, but since the lawsuit was filed, and DPI has since changed their guidance, and Whisk Rapids is now accepted. So, what we're really hoping for in this ruling is a favorable ruling that just provides more clarity for participating schools, for eligible families, and just that the government follow the rule of law. And moving on to kind of the bigger legal challenge to school choice. This is the Underwood versus Voss case. The respondents were Jill Underly, the superintendent of public instruction, Kathy Blumenfeld, secretary of Governor Evers' Department of Administration, and the speaker of the Wisconsin State Assembly, Robin Voss. So back in October of last year, petitioners that were backed by the funding of the Minocqua Brewing Company Super PAC asked the Wisconsin Supreme Court to end school choice in Wisconsin. This included a challenge to all of the private school parental choice programs in the state, the special needs scholarship program for students with disabilities, and independent charter schools. And the petitioners were seeking to bypass lower courts or kind of just skip lower courts and go straight to the state Supreme Court to get a quick decision by filing what's called an original action petition. Now, Will got involved in the case, even though, we weren't a party, none of our clients were named as parties, but we filed an amicus brief, which is kind of a friend of the court brief, and we filed a motion to intervene on behalf of 22 clients. We're really, really proud of this client group. It was the largest client group to file anything in the case. It represented parents of students enrolled in each of the choice programs, schools across the state, and multiple organizations that advocate for educational freedom and more options for families. And we thought this was exactly the group to be able to tell the court, not only that, as you can see here at the bottom of the PowerPoint slide, that the petitioners' claims were wrong on the facts and the law, but also just talk about the impact of this program. And speaking about impact, we also came out with this report around the same time, tidal wave. We kind of referred to this as the capacity report. We wanted to highlight, based on data, what would it mean for the public schools to absorb all of the students utilizing school choice back into the public schools? There's already a capacity crisis, teacher shortage, and schools would need to add transportation. Our report goes into more detail. This is a Dr. Will Flanders report, so there's a lot more detail in here. And something that we thought was a beneficial development was that our friends at the Liberty Justice Center use this data to essentially write their own amicus brief and get this in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court to kind of show the impact, particularly in Milwaukee, of what it would mean for MPS to have to absorb all of the choice students back into the public school system. And the last thing I'd add on this point is that, Governor Evers also echoed a lot of the sentiments in this report in a January 5th Journal Sentinel article, acknowledging that he doesn't support the lawsuit to end the voucher schools or the, school choice programs, and that it was created decades ago. And ending it via the lawsuit would be, quote, traumatic to a whole bunch of families and kids. So what we did on behalf of our clients was to say to the court, don't take this case as an original action. That was the first step. This is inappropriate as an original action. We don't think you should take the case at all. And we were really grateful, glad to see that the court unanimously agreed and Also, Governor Evers, Secretary of the Department of Administration, also agreed and asked the court not to take this case as an original action petition. So the petition was denied. And then just in terms of what to watch out for, what we think maybe would be on the horizon, these opponents to school choice have already publicly stated that they plan to refile the challenge to school choice in the near future. If they do, they will have to file at the circuit court level now. And one thing that's really important is that Wisconsin Supreme Court decisions are binding on circuit courts. They have to follow them. So this means that the circuit courts are required to follow existing precedent. And school choice in Wisconsin, and also at the federal level, has already withstood numerous legal challenges. So, petitioners, they might change their arguments from what they were when they filed the original action petition at the state Supreme Court. We don't know exactly what their arguments will be. But importantly, as you can see here, if the opponents try again, Will stands ready to defend these school choice programs, the parental choice schools, the independent charter schools, for Wisconsin children and their families to have educational options. And I'll turn it back over to my colleague.
Yeah, thanks, Cory. And as we get towards the end of the slides here, if anyone does have any questions, again, please feel free to put them into the Q&A. So what are we looking at going forward? This kind of dovetails what was on the earlier slide. I think we already talked about the income limits and things like that. But I think one thing to flag that you might be hearing about relatively soon is this notion of decoupling funding. This is something that Will, the organization, has been a supporter of for several years now. And in the past, even Governor Evers has said this is the state program and ought to be funded at the state level. We think that decoupling choice school and charter school funding from public school funding is sort of a win-win for both public schools and choice programs. For the public school side, they no longer see the property tax impacts that do exist from the choice program. And from the private school side, it would simply be a cleaner thing. It'd be a lot easier to see what is being spent and to sort of have the money follow the child in a much more clean-cut way than the current system. No other state uses this weird circuitous route of funding a choice program like Wisconsin does, and we're big supporters of moving away from that in the future. So just some conclusions here. Wisconsin, again, is the home to the original school choice program in the nation. But there's still a long way to go to reach the full dream of a fully realized what does school choice mean for everyone, right? We've talked with Cory about some of the roadblocks that currently exist with the perfection rule and things of that nature. But basically, the overall goal is let's get some of these bureaucratic barriers out of the way so that more families can take advantage of what we see here in terms of educational benefits. I think it's also important to note that one finding we had in the report we didn't really touch on in depth here is that rural schools often look almost the same as urban schools when we do these sorts of analyses. Obviously, there are districts like Milwaukee and Beloit that still come to the very bottom in terms of proficiency. But once you get beyond those two, oftentimes rural schools don't look much different than urban schools in terms of proficiency. So when we think about where educational options are needed, it's not just in our urban areas, it's across the entire state. And with that, we thank you for taking the time to listen to us today. Again, we'll give it a minute or two to see if any questions come in. But if not, please feel free to reach out to either one of us. If you have any policy questions, please feel free to reach out to me with the email there. And then Cory's email is on the other side of the screen there. So we have a question in the chat that from Phoebe that says, do you know that voucher programs are less expensive than public schools? Public schools must serve all students, including those who might require full-time special education, and they must provide transportation. How do you account for those expenses in your analysis? So this is a good question. Indeed, there are requirements on public schools to meet the needs of all comers, other than in the specialty schools that we see. But we do have the ability to model disability status in the analysis that we do this year. Again, we look at the demographic factors across the board that predict disability status, and so we're able to include that in our model of of student performance this year. So we're accounting for disability, not perfectly. I wouldn't claim this is a perfect accounting of disability, because there are differences, and it is a model, in the end. But we're doing it a lot better than we've been able to do previously. And so I'd make the case that while it's imperfect, we're doing a better job than simply just using the data that's directly available from DPI. So with that, if we don't see any other questions, again, please feel free to reach out to us. And once again, hope everyone is having a good school choice week, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you so much.